There was a time when Jeff Bezos looked tired for a very different reason. Not because of red carpets, not because of cameras, not because the entire world wanted a photograph of him. Back then, he looked exhausted because he was trying to build something nobody believed would work. And strangely enough, people who knew him during those years often describe him as happier than he looks today. That is what makes this story so fascinating. Because Jeff Bezos has everything most people spend their entire lives chasing: money, fame, influence, private jets, super yachts, a space company, a fortune so large that most people cannot even imagine it. And yet, over the last year, something about him has started to feel different. People noticed it during public appearances. They noticed it in photographs. They noticed it during interviews. And they especially noticed it after he married Lauren Sanchez in 2025. The public sees glamorous pictures, designer clothing, celebrity events, luxury vacations. But some people who have followed Jeff's life for decades see something else. They see a man who spent most of his adult life searching for the next horizon, and they wonder if that search ever really ends. Because long before Lauren entered the picture, before Amazon became one of the most powerful companies on Earth, before billion-dollar rockets and celebrity friendships, there was another version of Jeff Bezos, a version that very few people remember now. In the early 1990s, Jeff was working at a New York hedge fund called D.E. Shaw. He was smart, ambitious, intensely focused, but he was not famous, not even close. He was simply another young executive with big ideas and an unusual laugh that coworkers immediately noticed. That laugh would end up changing his life. A young Princeton graduate named McKenzie Tuttle worked nearby. Years later, she would remember hearing Jeff laughing through the office walls before she really knew him. Eventually they met. Then they started talking, and something clicked. What people often forget is that McKenzie was not drawn to a billionaire. There was no billionaire yet. No Amazon, no private islands, no giant yachts, no headlines. Just a young man with impossible ideas and a woman who believed in him before anyone else did. They married in 1993, simple, quiet, nothing flashy, nothing designed for magazines, nothing designed for social media, because social media did not even exist yet. The internet itself was still a mystery to most Americans. Many people watching this video probably remember that world, the sound of dial-up connections, bookstores on every corner, mail arriving in actual mailboxes, nobody ordering household products from a computer, and certainly nobody imagining that an online bookstore would one day become one of the largest companies in human history. But Jeff imagined it, and more importantly, McKenzie imagined it too. In 1994, Jeff came home with an idea. He wanted to leave a prestigious Wall Street career and move across the country to start an online bookstore. For most couples, that conversation would have ended immediately. It sounded risky, maybe even reckless. But McKenzie did not tell him he was crazy. She got in the car. Together, they drove from New York to Seattle. While McKenzie drove, Jeff reportedly worked on the business plan that would eventually become Amazon. That image matters, because it tells you something important about their marriage. This was not a woman standing beside success. She was there before success arrived. And for years, that partnership seemed unbreakable. What nobody realized at the time was that the very dream they were building together would slowly begin changing both of their lives. And, eventually, it would change Jeff Bezos himself. For a long time, Jeff Bezos and McKenzie seemed like the kind of couple people rarely talk about because nothing dramatic appeared to be happening. No scandals, no constant headlines, no public fights, just work, family, routine. And in many ways, those years became the foundation of everything Jeff would later be known for. When Amazon was still operating out of a rented house in Bellevue, Washington, life looked surprisingly ordinary. Jeff and McKenzie rented the home for less than $1,000 a month. The garage became Amazon's first headquarters. Desks were made from wooden doors because they were cheaper than buying office furniture. That detail says a lot about who Jeff was back then. People today see private yachts and luxury properties. The early employees remember something else: They remember a man obsessed with saving money, a man who believed every dollar should go back into the company, a man who still thought like someone building a future rather than protecting an empire. McKenzie was deeply involved during those years. Former employees later recalled her helping manage accounts, writing checks, organizing records, and negotiating some of Amazon's earliest freight contracts. She was not standing on the sidelines. She was inside the machine helping it run. And yet something interesting happened as Amazon started growing. The bigger the company became, the less visible McKenzie became. Not immediately. At first, nobody noticed. The late 1990s were exciting. Amazon was expanding rapidly. Investors were paying attention. The internet was transforming everyday life. Millions of Americans were experiencing online shopping for the first time. Every year seemed bigger than the one before. Jeff thrived in that environment. Growth energized him. Risk energized him. The challenge itself seemed to energize him. People who worked around him often described an intensity that could be difficult to match. Once he focused on something, it consumed him. And for a while, that intensity helped build Amazon into one of the most important companies in the world. But success has a strange way of changing the people who achieve it. Not all at once. Slowly. Almost invisibly. The schedules get fuller. The responsibilities grow larger. The pressure becomes constant. And eventually, the life that once felt temporary becomes permanent. Somewhere during those years, Jeff stopped being a businessman and started becoming a public figure. Then something even bigger happened. He started thinking beyond Amazon. In 2000, he founded Blue Origin, his space company. For Jeff, space was not a hobby. It was an obsession that stretched back decades. People close to him often described how fascinated he was by rockets, science fiction, and the future of humanity beyond Earth. The problem was that dreams have a cost, and sometimes that cost is not financial, sometimes the cost is time, attention, presence, the people sitting across the dinner table from you. As Amazon expanded and Blue Origin demanded more of his focus, Jeff's world became larger than most people could comprehend. Board meetings, investors, executives, government officials, media appearances, global influence. Meanwhile, McKenzie moved in the opposite direction. She focused more on raising their children. She continued writing. In 2005, her novel, The Testing of Luther Albright, won the American Book Award. But many people barely noticed, not because the accomplishment was small, because Jeff's shadow had become enormous. That is something many couples quietly experience. One person's success becomes so large that the other person's identity slowly fades from public view. Nobody plans for that to happen. Sometimes it just does. Years later, people would look at Jeff Bezos and see one of the richest men who ever lived. But long before the divorce, long before Lauren Sanchez, long before the headlines, there were already signs that the partnership which built Amazon was no longer the same partnership that had started inside that car driving toward Seattle. The changes were subtle, but they were there, and eventually, they would become impossible to ignore. Success does something strange to people, not always in a dramatic way. Sometimes the biggest changes happen so slowly that nobody notices them while they are happening. And that may be what happened to Jeff Bezos. By the late 2000s, Amazon was no longer a risky startup operating out of a garage. It had become a force. Millions of people depended on it. Entire industries were being reshaped by it, and Jeff was no longer just a businessman. He was becoming something much larger, a symbol, a public figure, a man whose decisions could affect entire markets. For many people, that kind of success would feel like the finish line. For Jeff, it seemed to create a new beginning, because once Amazon became one of the most powerful companies in the world, his attention started moving toward something else. Space, not as a hobby, not as a side project, as a mission. In 2000, he quietly founded Blue Origin. The company spent years operating almost entirely out of public view. While Amazon dominated headlines, Jeff was investing enormous amounts of time and money into a dream he had carried since childhood. People close to him often describe space exploration as one of the deepest passions of his life. The idea was larger than rockets, larger than tourism, larger than business. Jeff openly talked about millions of people eventually living and working in space. It sounds almost impossible, but that was always part of what made him different. Most people look at the world as it is. Jeff spent much of his life imagining what it might become. The problem is that vision can be difficult for the people living beside you, because while Jeff's world kept expanding outward, his personal life appeared to be moving inward. McKenzie became increasingly private. She rarely gave interviews, rarely sought attention, rarely stepped into the spotlight that surrounded her husband. Instead, she focused on writing. And in a detail that feels surprisingly important now, the novel she published in 2005 was not really about success at all. It was about a husband, a father, a man struggling to hold his family together while emotional distance slowly grows inside the home. The book was called The Testing of Luther Albright. It later won an American Book Award. Years later, some readers would go back and look at that novel differently. Not because it was secretly about Jeff Bezos, there is no evidence of that, but because the themes feel strangely familiar. A successful man, a changing family, a growing emotional gap, a life that looks stable from the outside, while something more complicated is happening underneath. Whether intentional or not, those themes seem almost haunting today, especially when you look at what eventually happened to their marriage. By the mid-2010s, Jeff's life barely resembled the one he had built with McKenzie in Seattle. He owned major newspapers. He appeared on magazine covers. Politicians wanted meetings with him. World leaders knew his name. His fortune was climbing into territory that almost nobody in modern history had ever reached. And something else was happening. Celebrity culture was beginning to pull him closer. Not immediately. At first, it happened around the edges. High-profile events, award ceremonies, exclusive gatherings, the kind of rooms filled with actors, producers, billionaires, athletes, and public figures. For most of his life, Jeff had lived more like an engineer than a celebrity. Now those worlds were starting to collide, and people who had watched him for decades noticed a subtle shift. The reserved man who once drove a Honda Accord for years after becoming wealthy seemed increasingly comfortable inside a world built around attention, not necessarily because he wanted attention itself, but because success had placed him at the center of it. Then, somewhere along the way, the separation between Jeff Bezos, the businessman, and Jeff Bezos, the public figure, started disappearing. And once that happened, the next chapter of his life was already getting closer, even if nobody fully understood it yet, including Jeff himself. By 2018, Jeff Bezos was one of the most recognizable men on Earth. Not just wealthy, powerful, the kind of person whose decisions could move markets and make international headlines. For years, people had looked at his marriage to McKenzie as one of the few stable parts of a life that had become unimaginably large. Then everything changed. In January 2019, Jeff and McKenzie announced they were divorcing after 25 years of marriage. NYTimes.com, https, www.nytimes.com, 2019 09 Technology, Jeff Bezos, divorce, HTML, UTM source, ChatGPT.com. The announcement shocked people, not because marriages never end, but because their relationship had seemed different. They had built something together from almost nothing. Many people assumed that kind of history created permanence. A day later, another story exploded. The National Enquirer published details of Jeff's relationship with Lauren Sanchez. NYTimes.com, https, www.nytimes.com, 2019 02 07 Business Media Jeff Bezos National Enquirer, blackmail, HTML, UTM, source, ChatGPT.com. Suddenly, a private marriage became public discussion. Headlines appeared everywhere, photographs, text messages, speculation, questions. For months, it seemed impossible to avoid. Lauren Sanchez came from an entirely different world than McKenzie. She had worked in television, she was comfortable on camera, comfortable around celebrities, comfortable in environments that Jeff had spent most of his life avoiding. And that difference matters. Because people often assume relationships begin because two people are similar. Many times, the opposite is true. Sometimes people are drawn toward what feels completely different from the life they have been living. By then, Jeff had spent decades inside boardrooms, warehouses, strategy meetings, investor calls, and corporate pressure. His life had become intensely structured, controlled, scheduled. Lauren brought a different energy, a different social world, a different pace. Friends and reporters who observed them during the early years of their relationship often described Jeff looking unusually relaxed and energized. People, calm, HTTPS. People, calm, human interest, Jeff Bezos, Lauren, Sanchez relationship timeline, UTM sourced a ChatGPT calm. For a while, it seemed like he had discovered a completely new chapter of life, and maybe he believed he had. That is an important detail because many people watching this understand something younger audiences often do not. There is a certain danger that comes with major life transitions, especially after long marriages, especially after enormous success. Sometimes people reach a point where they start wondering if there is still another version of themselves waiting somewhere, another life, another beginning, another chance. And when that feeling appears, logic becomes less powerful than emotion. The divorce settlement became one of the largest in history. McKenzie received roughly 4% of Amazon stock, worth about $38 billion at the time. BBC.com, https, www.bbc.com, news, business, 47840-797, UTM, source, a ChatGPT.com. Yet what stood out was how little public fighting happened afterward. No long television interviews, no public attacks, no books exposing private details. McKenzie largely disappeared from public drama. Jeff moved in the opposite direction. His public profile became even larger. Hollywood events, award ceremonies, celebrity friendships, luxury vacations photographed around the world. The contrast became impossible to ignore. People who remembered the old Jeff sometimes struggled to connect the two versions together. The man building desks from wooden doors. The man attending exclusive celebrity gatherings. The man driving a Honda Accord. The man standing beside movie stars on red carpets. Both were real. Both were Jeff Bezos. But they felt like different people, and maybe that was the deeper issue. Because sometimes the hardest thing is not becoming successful. Sometimes the hardest thing is recognizing who you became while chasing success. And by the time Jeff married Lauren Sanchez in 2025, there were already quiet questions being asked by people who had followed his journey from the beginning. Not about money, not about the marriage, about something far more personal. Whether the life he spent decades building was actually the life he wanted anymore. The strange thing about regret is that it rarely arrives all at once. Most of the time, it appears quietly, in small moments. A photograph, a memory, an old routine that suddenly feels far away. A person you once shared everything with becoming a stranger. Nobody knows exactly what Jeff Bezos thinks when cameras are not around. Only he knows that. But over the last year, people have started noticing something difficult to ignore. Not scandal, not controversy, fatigue. A different kind of tiredness. The kind that does not come from work. The kind that sometimes comes from trying to keep up with a version of life that no longer feels natural. After Jeff and Lauren Sanchez married in Venice in 2025, the images traveled around the world. The wedding reportedly cost tens of millions of dollars and attracted celebrities, executives, media figures, and international attention. Reuters, com, https, www.reuters. World, Europe, Venice braces Bezos, Sanchez wedding extravaganza, 2025, 06-26, UTM, source, ChatGPT.com. For some people, it looked like a dream. For others, something felt unusual. Not because of Lauren, not because of the money, because of Jeff. People remembered a different man. The man who once seemed uncomfortable with attention. The man who spent years talking about customers, logistics, technology, and long-term thinking. Now he was standing in the middle of a world built around image, and the contrast felt striking, especially to people who had watched his entire journey. Then came the public appearances, the photographs, the award shows, the vacations. And little by little, a conversation started appearing online. Not about whether Jeff loved Lauren, not about whether Lauren loved Jeff, about whether Jeff actually looked happy. That question is impossible to answer from photographs alone, but people keep asking it anyway. Maybe because happiness is easier to recognize when it feels natural, and harder to recognize when it looks performed. What makes the story emotional is not the divorce, not the billions, not the headlines. It is the passage of time. When Jeff and McKenzie drove to Seattle in 1994, nobody could have imagined how their lives would unfold. Not even them. They were building a company, building a family, building a future. Like millions of other couples who start something together and believe they will always remain the same people. But people do change. Sometimes dramatically. Sometimes so gradually they barely recognize it themselves. And perhaps that is what McKenzie understood long before the rest of the world did. Not that Jeff would leave. Not that another woman would appear. Not that a marriage would end. Something deeper. That success was transforming him into someone she could no longer reach. After the divorce, Mackenzie Scott chose a path almost nobody expected. Instead of becoming a celebrity herself, she focused on philanthropy. By 2025, she had donated tens of billions of dollars to charities, educational programs, food organizations, housing initiatives, and community groups across the United States. YieldGiving.com, https, YieldGiving.com, Approach to Giving, Forbes.com, https, www.forbes.com, Sites, Randall Lane, 2025, 12509, America's Top Givers 2025, UTM Source, ChatGPT.com. She rarely gives interviews, rarely appears in headlines, rarely explains herself. And maybe that silence says more than any public statement could, because while much of the world focused on Jeff Bezos' new life, McKenzie quietly built her own. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's former wife, as herself. And maybe that is why this story continues to resonate with so many people. It is not really about billionaires. It is not really about fame. It is not even really about divorce. It is about something far more familiar. The fear of waking up one day and realizing the life you worked so hard to build no longer feels like yours. Jeff Bezos spent decades chasing the future. Amazon, Blue Origin, space, innovation, expansion, the next horizon, the next challenge, the next chapter. And maybe that drive is exactly what made him one of the most successful people in modern history. But it also raises a question that no amount of money can answer. What happens when the thing you were chasing finally catches you? Do you think Jeff Bezos looks happier today than he did during those early Amazon years with McKenzie? Or do you think success changed his life in ways he never expected? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more deep dives into the lives, relationships, and untold turning points behind some of the most famous names in the world.